Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we will be reviewing the Abu GW-610 Geisha Anaerobic Wash Processed Panama from Definitive Panama Coffee Studio. And there's the cup right there. And yes, we are working with generic cups on this one. But it's Definitive, based out of Tokyo, Japan. And I'm currently at a park near their Suginami City location, which is their only location. And this is my first time trying any of their coffees, as they're a coffee roaster I've heard a lot about, but never had an opportunity to try, given that they don't currently ship to the United States. But this coffee roaster appealed to me for some pretty obvious reasons, and that's because they are a Panama exclusive coffee roaster. And a lot of people know that Panamanian coffees are my favorite coffees in the entire world, so I definitely wanted to swing by and check out their shop for myself. And the notes about this coffee shop, it's actually kind of interesting. So it's been pretty similar to a lot of the other shops in that they do have almost all of their coffees available as a pour-over offering. They were actually sold out of a couple of them, and they didn't have any wash processed coffees, which is actually fine by me, considering that every single review we've done up to this point has been of a wash processed coffee. And I was thinking about that, and I'm like, maybe we should do at least one non-wash processed coffee. Though, if going into the series, you would have told me it would have been the one Panamanian exclusive shop, then I probably would have been really surprised by that. But this is the one that the barista said was his current favorite, so I was definitely curious to try it out for myself. Now, they are the first roaster we've been to that actually uses the roast as their roasting machine, and they continue to go along with the trend of roasting lighter than I've previously experienced from so many of these Japanese-based coffee roasters. So it seems like the entire Japanese-based coffee scene has skewed a little bit more on the lighter side of things, which is quite nice. This is definitely one of the lighter coffee roasters that we've had during this trip. So let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee itself. And the first thing I wanted to say was that oftentimes when it comes to these anaerobic wash processed coffees, they can act significantly cleaner than even natural processed coffees, as was the case with this one right here, as it did offer some really nice clarity in general. The one thing that's going to really take some points away from it is that at times the fruit could feel ever so slightly funky, and there was an ever so slight fermenty aspect to it, kind of taking away from the overall clarity. Even then, it's really hard for any sort of anaerobic, even anaerobic wash processed coffees to score a level 5 in terms of the clarity. There were some really nice aspects in terms of the definition for this coffee, as I couldn't help but notice some very strong and vibrant citric aspects to it. And I was thinking most notably the pineapple note that they have listed on here. It did feel like an ever so slightly funky, ever so slightly fermenty pineapple, but there was really nice definition to the flavor profile of that part in this coffee. In addition to that, there was plenty of that citric brightness that you were probably going to be expecting from a Panamanian Geisha. It was just much more vibrant than I think I might have anticipated, but that shouldn't have come as a surprise. Basically, the best way I can kind of describe this coffee is if you think of your classic washed Panamanian Geisha and you just kind of turn up the level in terms of the flavor, the strength of this coffee, then you can taste a lot of those aspects that normally would be a little bit more subtle and clean in a much more pronounced manner, as that's the best way that this coffee was kind of coming out. A lot of the florals, a lot of the citrus, a lot of those things just a little bit more pronounced and dominant within the cup. At the sacrifice of some really nice clarity. It wasn't maybe necessarily the cleanest coffee that we've had during this trip, but even then it did offer some really nice definition to the flavor profiles that you were experiencing. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have quite a few level 4s, so let's go through those real quick. We will start with the cleanliness level 4. Yes, that's exactly what I am alluding to, and it should be worth noting that just before trying this coffee, I actually did have one of Diego Bermuda's experimental coffees, so anything compared to that is going to feel extremely clean, as this one was significantly cleaner than that. Even then, I mean, I kind of have mixed feelings on it. It's a Geisha, so it's a Panamanian Geisha as well. I always am going to want that to score a level 5, and whenever it doesn't, that's not necessarily ideal for me. But even then, the level 4, given that it's an anaerobic, that's not bad by any means. Sweetness, correction, finish, level 4. Yes, it actually finishes nice and kind of even in general, so that's kind of different. I think that maybe with a lot of these heavier processed coffees, this one's not necessarily an overly heavily processed coffee, given it's an anaerobic washed as opposed to just straight anaerobic or anaerobic natural. It has a pretty nice finish to it. It doesn't linger too long. It's not overbearing. It's not too heavy. It's not too dominant. It does leave a pretty long-lasting, we'll say, citric component to the finish, but even then, it reaches that level 4, which is good. I don't want it to get that level 5 for something that's this intense to begin with. Sweetness, level 4. Yes, and it's a very sweet coffee, and that continues to go along the lines of the coffees we've had here in Japan as they seem to roast for a sweeter profile. And this one, I think, is probably going to be one of the least surprising coffees having that very high sweetness. This is one of the sweetest coffees I've had in this trip, higher side of the level four. Almost every coffee I think we've had has either been a three or a level four, but this one might be the sweetest out of all of those coffees. And that could be because their profile in this one is the most pronounced, and it's the heaviest processed coffee that we have reviewed in this series. Acidity, level 4. Yes, there's still plenty of brightness to this, and if anything, that might have been amplified ever so slightly by the processing method that this one offered. So there is a lot of the citric brightness, a fair bit of the floral brightness as well. So that at level 4, yes, definitely agree with that assessment. Florality, level 4. Yes, and I could possibly say that this is on the higher side of the level 4. If the base was a little bit more clean, then you could probably see the floral and the citric aspects scoring that level 5. But I think given that this cup just had enough intensity and enough other things around it, then those things kept at that level 4. They're still on the higher side of the level 4. And that's the other thing, that citrus fruit, level 4. Yes, so they do have a lemongrass note listed on here, but the pineapple is by far the most dominant and pronounced characteristic within this coffee for me. Again, ever so slightly, ever so fermenty. It's not necessarily the most clean pineapple, but it is a very pronounced pineapple, and you're definitely experiencing a fair bit of that in this coffee. And then we have one level 3, the body at level 3. That might have been the biggest surprise for me about this coffee. And as I was making this tasting wheel, I couldn't help but note just how much texture and body there was in this coffee. I do apologize for the sirens in the background. That's been another trend in this video series, so hopefully that's not too loud on your end, or the bird. But the only other thing I think that's really worth discussing is the caramel at level 2, because it did have a very slight candied aspect. But as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think that it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. It's pretty mixed, and let me start with the good. So the biggest positives I had for this one is that it is significantly better than the vast majority of anaerobic processed coffees we have reviewed on this channel, mostly due to the fact that it offered significantly more clarity and cleanliness than I typically experience from those types of coffees. So that kind of balanced out the fact that it may have been a little bit more vibrant and intense of a coffee when it comes to these Panamanian geishas, in which I typically look for a much more clean and subtle profile to them. Even then, it offered some great fruit aspects as well as some really nice florals and some great sweetness as well, giving it the 4 things that I look for the most in coffee in general. So those are the really nice positives I had for this one. That being said, what I also feel about this coffee is that I might have been a little bit more curious to try some of their other offerings, given that they have a Whoosh Whoosh and a Pacamara, which are 2 varieties that I rarely see when it comes to Panamanian coffees. Those were more heavily processed coffees, so I'm not entirely sure if I would have enjoyed those, but they might have made for more unique reviews, as they are some coffees that intrigue me a lot, and the entire concept behind this coffee shop and coffee roaster intrigues me a lot, given that this is something that I'm very curious about. I do want to try some other varieties, and I do want to try a lot more of their coffees, so once they start shipping to the United States, which I heard that they will be hopefully sometime soon, then I do want to try some more of their coffees and see how they turn out, as they do seem to have some very interesting and unique coffees, especially for Panama. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. I feel like if you like a lot of the components that are present within Panamanian geishas, but you want a little bit more intensity to them, this would be an ideal fit because it had all of those aspects to it. And I keep harping on the citric and floral profiles. They're very much there. They're just very much pronounced. And most specifically, that pineapple-like attribute that is on here, it is quite intense. It is very strong. It is one of the most, we'll say, pineapple-forward cups of coffee we've reviewed on this channel. So it's got a lot going for it. Great sweetness, great clarity, and even then, it's just a little bit more of a light profiled coffee, especially relative to a lot of the other things out here. So just a lot of positives to take away in that regard as well. Just very curious about some of the other offerings that they might have. I think for the most part, I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee or anything else from Definitive, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it or them as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. But this right here has been a review of the Abu GW-610 Geisha Anaerobic Wash Processed Panama from Definitive Panama Coffee Studio. Thank you for watching.